So in today's video, I'm talking about abandonment issues, healing the fear of being alone. Because if you come from a dysfunctional family, you've probably experienced some form of abandonment issues in your life, and this video is going to help you heal. But first, if you're new, my name's Michelle Ferris, and I'm a psychotherapist, and I love helping people create relationships that work. So there are two ways you can get abandoned during childhood. One is physical, and the other is emotional. Physical abandonment is more about the parent not physically being present. So you might have a parent that lives in another state due to a divorce. Maybe you have a parent who was sick or passed away. Or you had a parent that overworked and put their career in front of everything else. So you were left feeling like you don't really have a parent because they've never spent time with you. Now, emotional abandonment is a little bit trickier because the child knows that the parent's there, but they're not really there. They're not present emotionally. But because as kids, we don't have language to describe or understand that, you may have blamed yourself for doing something wrong versus understanding that this is the adult's responsibility to be there for you. Because kids are like sponges. They take in their environment and they will personalize anything that doesn't make sense to them and think that it's their fault. And that's really the danger of having abandonment issues, is that we think we did something to cause it and you actually didn't. So what causes someone to abandon their children? Well, the biggest reason is that they don't have the resources to parent their children effectively. They might have their own mental health issues like addiction, depression, anxiety, narcissism, overwhelmed with life. They also may come from a family where they were abandoned as kids, so they just continue the cycle, not because they want to, but because they don't know another way. You know, we tend to repeat the familiar, even when it's dysfunctional, until we get help. And some people just don't have the energy or the emotional intelligence to understand what kids really need. And kids, let's face it, they need our time and they need our energy, both physically and emotionally, on a consistent basis. And without that, the fear of abandonment issues are much more likely to develop. Now, if you've ever experienced abandonment issues, say me too in the comments, because you're not alone and this video is going to help. So how do you know if you have a fear of abandonment? Here are some things to look for. Any perceived threat of abandonment causes panic. That's the biggest sign. So if somebody leaves you or if somebody's late, you assume the worst case scenario. It's not just that they're late, it's that, oh my God, what did I do to cause them to be late? Do they not love me anymore? You make up all these negative assumptions because you fear the worst. And that's what a fear of abandonment does, because as you didn't get the connection and the time and the attention you deserved as children. And what that does is that sets us up in adulthood to be emotionally starved. Another sign that you have abandonment issues is that if a relationship ends or is threatening to end, you feel like your world is coming down, and you will do anything you can to try to hold on to that relationship. And in some cases, we stay in abusive relationships much longer than we should because we would rather stay with an abusive person than face that pain of being alone. So it's really important to be able to start to identify this and work with this in your own recovery. So an example of an abandonment trigger might be somebody's late. And instead of you understanding, oh, they're just late, this is kind of annoying, but I can wait, you fear the worst. You think, oh my God, they don't care about me, they've forgotten about me, I'm not important to them. You go to the worst case scenario. And that's when you know you have a fear of abandonment, because it's not just a hurt feeling, it's a panic. It's something that spirals you into a lot of negative thoughts and anxiety. And that's important information for you to identify, because that's part of the healing, is to identify what your fear of abandonment looks like. So how does being abandoned impact us as adults? Well, the biggest thing is that you probably grow up feeling undeserving of someone's time and attention. You might find that struggles with low self-esteem really plague you, because when our caregivers don't prioritize spending time with us and going to our events and being with us when we need support and encouragement, we feel unimportant. And the likelihood of us feeling bad about ourselves becomes more of an issue. Codependent behaviors also develop, because if you feel less than growing up because nobody gave you time, you will find dysfunctional ways to get somebody's attention. You might people please, you might try to be invisible, you might try not to have any wants or needs. All of those behaviors can be part of codependent behaviors. So you really want to be able to identify that. You also may struggle with addiction, because when we have fear of abandonment issues, there's a layer of pain that's underneath all of those experiences that needs to be dealt with. And if we don't have the tools, we're going to resort on substances or other compulsive behavior to hide that pain. So abandonment issues really creates an intense fear of being alone. And this is really imperative when it comes to romantic relationships, because you may miss those early red flags in relationship because you're so busy focused on being connected to somebody because they're your lifeline. You actually miss early warning signs of narcissism or addiction or abusive behavior, because we're not looking for that if we're starved for attention. We're looking for someone to fill the void, and I don't want that for you. But this is part of relationship recovery, is to start identifying how those abandonment issues impact you today. So how do you heal from abandonment issues? Well, the first thing is you need to be able to start doing inner child work. This is super important. And usually this involves having some form of therapy, because connecting to that childlike part of you is part of the healing, because the child is the one that feels abandoned. Adults don't get abandoned, but we get hurt and we get left. And part of the journey is to go back and do that inner child work, because the child is the one that fears abandonment and goes into panic mode. Another thing you can do by yourself is to keep an inner child journal. There's lots of books on inner child work as well, but if you keep a journal, let that part of you express itself. Sometimes it's done by your adult can be your dominant hand if you're a right-hander, and then the child part of you write with the non-dominant hand. And have a dialogue back and forth, and it can be really impactful and eye-opening to notice what the child wants to say to you. I've done it myself, and it's been a very powerful way of healing. But usually fear of abandonment issues, especially if they're more severe, really need professional help. The other goal when healing the fear of being alone and your abandonment issues is that you need to develop self-trust, because what happens is if we were abandoned emotionally or physically, we tend to abandon ourselves by dismissing our point of view, not honoring our own intuition, not really listening to our boundaries, and that impacts us. So the goal is to not abandon yourself. And the way you do this is you start honoring how you really feel. Figure out what your boundaries are and start setting them. Develop a healthier connection to yourself, because the fear of abandonment usually means that we're putting all of our emotional eggs in their basket because we can't live without them. And if you start to befriend yourself and create a healthier connection to yourself and even spend more time with yourself, that's going to shift that unhealthy dependency. And that's part of recovery, because the goal is to work with the child and to do your own work developing a healthier relationship with yourself. And a major part of that is to learn how to trust and honor your own experiences, because as a child, you probably didn't get that. So the next thing I want you to do is go watch my video on how to stop abandoning yourself and build self-trust. Thanks so much.